We wrap up tonight's program about St. Louis food with something to wash it all down. Beer, of course, has always played a big role in St. Louis, but today it's not just big business anymore. You walk into one of these and you order one of these, and for most of us that's the start of having a beer. But for John Whitty, that beer started weeks ago, just like this. He's the brewmaster at Square One Brewery on Park near Lafayette Square. And we spent a Monday with him doing something people have been doing in St. Louis a long time, cooking up a batch of beer.
We've actually got 3 different ingredients in this particular beer. The base malt, the majority of it is 2-row malted barley. And
you know the basic ingredients from the beer commercials: grains, hops, water. Malt is grain that's gone through a process of germination and roasting, and now we're talking some flavor.
Right in an oven. Then depending on how moist the grain is and how hot the oven is, they can get a whole range of colored and flavored malts.
And it already smells like South St. Louis in here.
Yeah.
And in fact, what they do here at Square One or other micro-breweries is what they do at Anheuser-Busch or AB InBev now. But of course here it is done on a huge and much more automated scale. But still, it all starts the same way, with grains fed into a vat of hot water to make what's called mash.
It's like a big pot of malto meal.
Yeah. There won't be any alcohol until the final step, but this is where the water begins to pick up the sugars needed for fermentation, as well as flavor and color. The wooden mixer he's using is called a brewer's or a mash paddle. And I'm thinking there was a time in St. Louis history when you would have seen immigrants getting off steamboats on the levee, carrying one of these brought with them all the way from Germany. Although early St. Louisans were making beer, it was really the Germans who made this a beer town. They brought their paddles, their recipes, and their know-how, and importantly, a way of life, in which socializing, even family life, revolved around beer and music, and St. Louis was filled with beer halls and beer gardens. The other thing St. Louis had, besides Germans, was caves. Good, cool places to store or lager beer. Urig's Cave at Jefferson and Washington wasn't just a storehouse, it also served as an underground beer hall and theater. A great place in St. Louis summers. It is flooded now, but years ago it was temporarily pumped out, and some cavers took these videos showing all the improvements that had been made to Urig's Cave. Better known in St. Louis is Cherokee Cave on the south side. The Lemp family built their brewery over this cave and stored their beer in it. Cherokee Cave was open for a while for tours, but it's closed to the public now. Cavers, though, occasionally take people down here for a lesson in geology and brewing history.
The advantage of this cave for Old Man Lemp was that you could put beer down here and keep it cool.
It was cold. He brewed his beer on 2nd and Walnut down by the south leg of the arch and transported it up here until 1850s when they started building the brewery buildings here. This hole goes up to the surface, and they used to bring ice in and drop it down in the cave, and they lowered the temperature of the cave to 35 degrees.
Before Prohibition, there were more than a dozen breweries in St. Louis, but only a few survived. The Lemp Brewery did not make it, but the buildings are still there. Others lasted longer. On the north side, the old Falstaff Brewery, now apartments. And just off Interstate 55, you see the distinctive 19th century architecture of the old Griesedick Brothers Brewery. But in the end, there was only one left still operating, one really big brewery. But in time there developed in America a revival of small-scale brewing, even stovetop home-brewing. And that's how John Whitty got started and went from being a veterinarian to a beer maker. Now, he does come from a family that was in the winemaking business in St. Charles. They got out of the business before Prohibition, but the family tradition survived.
We made wine on small scale at home, stomped the grapes as kids, and then got into veterinary school and had an intern bring some homemade beer to a Christmas party. And it tasted great. It was fascinated with the whole process of how he went through it. Realized that we had all this wine equipment sitting at home that we weren't using anymore, and so I went home that Christmas break and made my first batch of beer, and that was really it. I was hooked.
It helps to have a science background in brewing, taking the measurements needed along the way and making adjustments where needed, and treating your equipment as you would a laboratory. What could possibly go wrong? Have you ever lost a batch?
Oh yeah, if there's a brewer that tells you they haven't, then it's either a white lie or it just hasn't happened yet. Things that can go wrong is if you're not as tight on sanitation as you can be. Probably 90% of what we do is clean. We're opening up the kettle valve, and then we're closing our recirculation valve. So now we're actually sending the wort into the kettle.
The first step is done. The liquid, now called wort, has been transferred to another tank, and the spent grains are removed from the mash tank. A farmer will pick this up and feed it to his pigs.
Pumping those.
The wort is boiled, and hops are added at various times.
So we just pour this right in?
Just going to pour those right in there.
Hops are flowers from a vine, and these have been processed into pellets.
Hops number 2.
This is something they're not going to let you do at the Anheuser-Busch tour. But once, years ago, long before the takeover, they did let us behind the scenes for a visit to a room on the top floor of the brew house. This is where the taste experts do their work, and it begins not with beer, but with samples from shipments of the ingredients, the malt, the rice, and the different kinds of hops that are used in the brewing. They check samples of beer from batches that are not quite done to make sure that things are going as they should. And then there's a blind taste test from bottles of beer shipped from every AB brewery in the world. They want to know that a Budweiser made in St. Louis tastes the same as one made in Tampa or even in China. Now, a lot of beer aficionados sort of look down on these mass-produced light American lagers, but John Whitty is not one of them. As a tribute to AB when it was being taken over, Whitty started brewing his own light lager using Budweiser-type ingredients. He found that it is not a simple recipe and is quite a challenge to get it right.
So Budweiser's actually harder than it looks.
Very hard. It's actually, the lighter you get on a beer, the much more difficult it is, because if any problem arises, you detect it immediately because there's not as much there to hide.
Today he's not making a really light or dark beer, but something in between, a light ale.
That's pretty much what the beer is going to look like after it's done fermenting. Right now, obviously, it's just a bitter, sweet liquid. We haven't added the yeast yet, and this is still on the hot side.
The hot wort is cooled and pumped to the fermentation tank.
And I'm going to go ahead and add the yeast.
From the bottom of a batch of beer that's already underway, he draws off some of the active yeast culture and adds that to his new batch. And then his work is pretty much done, and the yeast's work begins.
So does it actually consume the sugar and change it into alcohol?
Yes, once it switches over to the anaerobic, once all the oxygen's gone. So initially it's using that sugar to fuel its reproduction.
It's going to be ready to drink in a couple of weeks. There's no bottling or putting it in kegs for delivery. Everything that is made here is consumed here. And this is what it will look like. Square One Brewery's Light Squared Ale. A couple of samples to finish the story, some talk about color, clarity, and of course, taste. And the St. Louis tradition continues.